answers of weather on GB News.
Don't miss your chance to win our Super Summer Giveaway. With your chance to win £30,000 cash, our biggest cash prize to date. Which means you get to spend every single penny however you like. What plans would you make with an extra £30,000 cash in your bank account? Take your family on the ultimate holiday, buy that treat that's always seemed out of reach, or just put it in the bank for a later date. However you'd spend it, make sure you don't miss out. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome along to the Neil Oliver Show on GB News TV, radio and online. Tonight on the show we will assess the first report to come from the United Kingdom COVID-19 inquiry, which has been investigating the United Kingdom's resilience and preparedness for a pandemic emergency. We'll be debating what the new Labour government should do if we are to cut carbon emissions significantly by 2030. And indeed whether that is even a desirable aim in the first place. And I'll be discussing a truly momentous week in American politics as President Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt before naming his running mate for his presidential bid. All of that coming up, and plenty of discussion with my panellists this week, Andrew Eborn. But first, an update on the latest news headlines.
Good evening. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Rachel Reeves has suggested that pay rises could be on the way for public sector workers. Independent review bodies are reportedly set to recommend pay rises of 5.5% for teachers and NHS staff. But schools and hospitals are unlikely to be able to meet the above-inflation boost with their existing budgets. The Chancellor says a final decision will be made soon and insists the sum in her budget will add up. Normal levels of service at GP surgeries will take some time to come back after Friday's global IT outage. The British Medical Association warns GPs need time to catch up on lost work over the weekend after the tech glitch knocked a computer system used by doctors offline. The outage was caused by a faulty security update that was deployed to around 8.5 million Windows devices. Now, a Labour MP has told GB News that she became pregnant at the age of 15 after being groomed and raped by an older man. Natalie Fleet says she has weekly nightmares about the ordeal 23 years ago, but now wants to be a voice for all women.
Now we have labels like grooming that we didn't have then. I didn't know we were having unprotected sex. You know, I was a child, and this is statutory rape. You know, at the time, this isn't something that we're talking about. It's not how I saw myself. I saw myself as, you know, at 15, you definitely think you're old enough to do all these things. But another thing that I can do, now I'm here, is I really want to be a voice for all of those people, all of those women that have children in far from ideal circumstances.
Jeremy Hunt has apologised for failures in the UK's pandemic preparations highlighted by the COVID inquiry. In its first report, the inquiry found the former government had failed the public due to what it called significant flaws in preparing for a pandemic. The former Chancellor and Health Secretary acknowledged that he'd been part of what he described as groupthink, where there was over-preparation for a flu pandemic, whilst other types weren't considered. Police have named the victim of a daylight shooting in South London. 20-year-old Jessie Lloyd-Smith was shot in the Peckham area shortly before 5 o'clock on the 10th of July. Police said Mr Lloyd-Smith's family are being supported by specially trained officers as the investigation continues. A hate crime investigation is underway after 3 pride flags were vandalised outside Forest Gate railway station in East London. The Met Police is appealing for information after the pavement paintings were covered with spray paint in the early hours of Friday morning. It follows previous incidents in June, which the force believes are linked. Officers have trawled CCTV, made house-to-house inquiries and conducted forensic investigations, but so far no arrests have been made. And in the US, President Biden's regret at not running in the 2016 election is reportedly fueling his determination to stay in the race. Current and former aides to the president told the US news website Axios that he'd planned to challenge Hillary Clinton for the nomination in 2016, but was advised against it by Barack Obama, which is said to be making him more determined to continue his campaign. Vice President Kamala Harris insists Joe Biden will be the nominee, despite some big donors now seeing her as a possible replacement. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. I'm back in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
We used to say the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. We don't have to say that anymore because left and right are hand in hand. Whatever I say next about the left or the right, what I really mean is the old guard, the uniparty, the establishment. What I've been watching this week is the further collapse of what still calls itself the left into deluded anti-human madness. Truly a wonder to behold. Here in the UK, there's a newly minted government calling itself Labour. Many of us remember when the Labour Party of the United Kingdom stood for the rights of working people, or at least it said it did. We could debate how sincere and authentic was that stance and that claim, But at least there was a time when representatives of the Labour Party, many of whom came from working backgrounds, coal miners, steel workers and the like, at least appeared to challenge those demonstrably intent on taking advantage of working people or on treating working people with out-and-out contempt. That British Labour Party was also patriotic, proud of the heritage and history of people descended from ancestors who'd built Britain, often with their bare hands, people who'd fought and often died for Britain. There was a strong anti-war element too, driven by those who understood that war is just another way to get rid of inconvenient people while making billions at the same time. I could go on, but my point is that the Labour Party in this country, indeed the so-called left in this country, used to at least pose, and quite convincingly, to be fair, as a bulwark between the people and the autocrats and authoritarians who wanted only to milk the people for whatever could be had from them. By now, however, the Labour Party, whatever it once was, whatever its founder Keir Hardie had in mind in the beginning, is now a flayed skin, flayed from the backs of the workers and worn as a cynical disguise, so that the Labour Party is no more and no less than sheep's clothing, worn by the wolf itself. Anything authentic and heartfelt by that Labour Party by what the Labour Party once represented is utterly gone, never to return, for good or ill. It's interesting always to remember that the original logo of the Fabian Society, founded in 1884 and dedicated to achieving socialism not by revolution but by stealth, was that self-same wolf in sheep's clothing. The Fabians, still alive and sneaking, are named after a Roman general, Fabius, remembered for his tactic of patiently wearing down his enemies over time. Now the empty, heartless marionette that is Labour has cast aside the wants of workers. Safe borders, stable communities, energy that's affordable and reliable, employment based on merit and not to meet inclusivity and diversity targets. Labour now, just like the Conservatives before, and as I said at the top, the other side of the uniparty coin is every bit as empty, disingenuous, existing only to serve the needs of the globalist agenda, its representatives being no more than factotums, puppetitions moved by strings pulled from above. The party that once claimed to stand for workers, in my view, stands now for smothering arable land beneath solar panels, chasing farmers out of the food business in a time of worldwide food uncertainty, for impoverishing what remains of the middle class, for committing billions as yet unearned by the taxpayers who'll foot the bill to 100 years of war in Ukraine, a war not for democracy, but only to secure the return on investments made by transnational corporations like BlackRock, to secure access to Ukrainian oil for the enrichment of the same corporate entities that profit still from the Iraqi oil made available by the illegal Iraq war, the war that killed 1 million civilians. The usual suspects like ExxonMobil, Chevron and Halliburton. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky was the guest of the Labour cabinet this week, colours firmly nailed to the mast there. Today's UK Labour government, as far as a reasonable person might conclude, might as well be in the business of financing the spilling of torrents of blood in pursuit of pumping oil, not here at home for domestic profit, but thousands of miles away for foreign corporations, knowingly standing by while innocent people of a land far away are slaughtered so that the rich of other foreign countries grow richer still. In my view, the Labour Party of this country is an abject and shameful travesty of anything the word left ever meant. Ironically, left now means only what it always meant, even to people with no interest in politics, which is to say, left is the opposite of everything that's right, right with a small r, right as in true. Nowadays, that which calls itself the left has descended into a decadent, spectacular self-destruct mode, not just here, but all over the world. It's likely that the self-destruction is deliberate, since politics are no longer required in a uniparty, in a one-world government world in which right and left are meaningless anachronisms. Every day, the left, that other side of the uniparty coin, is more exposed as only the manifestation of greed, envy and hate. Across the pond, in the USA, the madness of the left seems to be at fever pitch as well, frothing at the mouth, bug-eyed bonkers, in fact. I keep thinking things can get no crazier there in the home of the brave, but over and over I find I must only wait a bit for things to get crazier yet, so we'll see. The left in American politics manifests in the main as the Democratic Party, of course. That's what we're invited to believe, at least, since left is as meaningless there as here. It's hard to see those so-called Democrats, once the party of Jack and Bobby Kennedy, as anything but irrelevant now, rendered that way by their having given in, it would appear, to undisguised, full-blown hatred of anyone and everyone that stands in opposition to the naked application of power. In my opinion, the Democrats are now the monsters their predecessors once claimed to exist to fight. A notion like a person's character being more important than their skin colour is just one of many platitudes cast aside as yet more flayed skins, empty and dead as the sheep's skin cloaking the reality of UK Labour. All this inversion of what had gone before, of the turning inside out and upside down of morality, of sanity itself, surely reached some kind of peak in the immediate aftermath of the bloodying of Donald Trump at the rally in Pennsylvania. So filled with seething hatred are the Democrats and the craven, paid-for mainstream media that dances to their hellish tune, hatred not just of Donald Trump, but of any fellow citizen that prefers him to the human wreck that is President Joe Biden. So surrendered to hatred are those posing as Democrats and their ilk. Their instinctive responses to the blood and bullets were either to pretend nothing much had happened or to say President Trump had brought it all upon himself. I was especially struck by the reflexive tendency towards making light of the firing of live rounds when a man, a husband and father, was killed in the same moment as the winging of Trump by a bullet to the brain. That tragedy, for a family, but also, given the circumstances, for any nation claiming to be civilised, or at least claiming to value the well-being of its people, appeared not to matter. What mattered was to dismiss the apparent attempt on the life of the former president, who, in the end, seemed to be saved not by any action by what we're invited to believe is the best equipped, best financed Secret Service on the planet, but rather moving his head at the last moment, and then his having had the presence of mind to drop behind the armoured cladding on the front of the stage. Whatever happened that day, whoever is behind it and why, an innocent man is dead. Other innocents are injured. I say again, the left has lost it. The left has dropped the mask, thrown it away entirely. The left has given in to the base nature of the worst of people, given in to hatred. I watched the developing story of the shooting, how the politicians and the legacy media took a breath, saw the writing on the wall and started rolling out the rhetoric about America being no place for violence of any kind. In ways I can't fathom myself, the American left seemed to run out of words, so that some of their morning mainstream media shows, Morning Joe on MSNBC, for example, decided not to comment, opting only for rolling news. It seems to me that when they no longer felt self-righteous and safe doing the only thing they'd been doing, which is loudly hating Trump and finding forms of words that previously had sought to make him a target of one sort or another, they were left with nothing to say. No policies, no point. When hating Trump was off the table, even for them, they had nothing at all. A person might think that if the Democrats really believe Trump is like Hitler or Stalin, as they've been howling for months, calling him a fascist and a would-be dictator, if that comparison to dictators of the past came from somewhere authentic, something honestly heartfelt, they would truly want rid of him once and for all. But when whatever happened, happened, when Donald Trump dropped on that stage and then appeared blood-stained and defiant moments later, the so-called left had nothing but hollow calls for unity and an end to hateful rhetoric, when hateful rhetoric has been their only stock in trade. When push came to shove, even their hatred was hollow, as it turned out, empty. In the end, exposed to the bright light of day, the American left aren't even convincing baddies. All of it makes a person, a thinking person, wonder just what on earth we're being invited to watch now. There's an emptiness about all of it. Beneath the bellowing voices, the theatrically bare-teethed reality is hard to find. Sincerity seems absent. All of it has an unmistakable end of empire feel about it as well. And the scramble, or perhaps the coordinated effort, a last desperate effort to distract us from the fakery of it all, behind the stages, the podiums, the looming shadow, is global war. Last week, George Robertson, exhumed from the graveyard of the House of Lords, was sounding off in his role as leader of the UK Strategic Defence Review. Robertson is now warning everyone who'll listen that we, as in the West, we must get militarily serious about what he describes as the serious threat posed by China and others in the East. He is only echoing Admiral Bauer, NATO's senior military officer, who's been telling NATO allies of the need to prepare what he called a whole-of-society approach to war. To me, that sounds a lot like working towards conscription. Bauer has talked of the need for more bodies, which seems like an unfortunate choice of words in the context of the meat grinder in Ukraine that has minced countless thousands of bodies and counting. Here's the thing. I talked about the apparent madness of the so-called left, a madness little different, if at all, from the madness of the so-called right. What worries me is that it's not madness, nothing out of control, nothing as it seems. What worries me most of all is that behind all the fireworks is nothing more than the cold-blooded determination to keep the rich rich and the powerful powerful. They want only to keep the money and power, and to achieve that, they would march our children to war. If that day comes, I know who I'll be going to war with. I'm joined today by broadcaster and lawyer and friend, Andrew Eborn. Hello, Andrew, how are you?
I'm very well, Neil, and it's nice to connect to you over so many miles with this terrible disaster that we've had with this IT meltdown. Does warn you about dependency on technology, doesn't it?
It does. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, what a few days, a week or so it's been, you know, with the shooting of Trump. You know, with the recent advent of a new government in 10 Downing Street in London, you know, with the trouble unfolding in Leeds on Friday, you know, and then this whatever it was, this technological falling over. If it wasn't a heat wave coming, it would feel in every sense that things are hotting up.
Oh, no, absolutely. But again, it sort of highlights that point when you get broadcasters and airlines and banking systems all collapsing. And it wasn't even as a result of third-party action, from what we can understand. It was an update which was supposed to be basically go seamlessly. It didn't go seamlessly, and the whole thing grinds to a halt. Whilst I'm an advocate of technologies, you know, I speak around the world as a futurist, encouraging people to embrace technology. I'd always make sure that there's a plan B, because if you're heavily reliant on it and the thing collapses, then we're basically left adrift.
And when it comes to we've got to contemplate what happened to President Trump. What did you make? I know it's impossible to be clear about exactly what happened and the rest of it, but what did you make of the immediate aftermath? You know, the way in which the various media fell over themselves in all manner of ways of reporting what had happened.
Yeah, there was all the backtracking. You're right. The words that people have been using, which is basically encouraging violence, if you like. And Biden himself was sort of turned around and say, when he meant let's have him in the crossfire, he didn't mean that at all. He meant you've got to focus on Trump. So they're all backpedaling on that sort of stuff. CNN have been much more gentle, apparently, on Trump's family when they're interviewing them and so on and so forth. But there are so many questions about that particular incident. I mean, if the security service, some of the best in the world weren't able to spot somebody who's just 100 yards or so away from the main stage. It's extraordinary. I also saw a number of the witnesses there talking about how they spotted this particular person with his sniper and so on and so forth, and they had alerted various people, but it wasn't until later that they did anything about it. So there are many, many questions to be answered, not least about how that particular person got onto the roof just 100 yards away from the president or the past president.
What was your reaction to the way in which the Labour government hit the street running towards its various targets?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, they're only a couple of weeks into it, as we say, and we had the King's speech where they outlined all of these plans, some of which were a surprise, some weren't properly mentioned, like AI and so on and so forth, and voting for under 16. Everybody expected that to happen. It wasn't in the speech. Time will tell. They promised a timeline of 100 days, for example, with this new employment bill, and obviously it's not 100 days from when it might be enacted, because it has to go through the process. But there's all sorts of changes there, and mega rights, if you like, for employees now, and giving them rights from the very first day when they start, the end of 0-hour contracts and all of those sort of things. And it's got to, basically, the devil will be in the detail, but it is early days yet. Let's see what happens. But I predict that people will be disappointed, because politics follows that pattern, doesn't it? We have a sort of stage where everybody is so desperate that they want to have something new, and that was the whole Labour campaign, was about change. And I suspect that a lot of people will be very disappointed that change may not be as quick as people predict. But also, if you look at the voter turnout, actually the biggest winner in the election was apathy. It had the lowest turnout for a long time, below 60%. Labour, whilst they got a large percentage of that, basically the votes were fragmented to a lot of these new parties. So Reform, for example, got 14% of the vote, but only 5 seats, whereas the Liberal Democrats got 12%, less than Reform's total vote, and they ended up with 72. So people who are thinking about a democratic system are going to be a bit frustrated and disappointed, I think. And I think that's going to pan out over the next few weeks.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, we're upon the first break already. Since as you probably spotted, I'm broadcasting from home on account of the technological problems that we're talking about. So I'm severely tempted to go and make myself a cup of tea in the break. But afterwards, we'll be discussing the first report published by the United Kingdom COVID-19 inquiry, which has been investigating how well we were prepared for the outbreak of a pandemic.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Khloe Kardashian has come under fire after posting a picture of her 6-year-old daughter wearing a full face of makeup.
Yeah, the reality TV star said the youngster was participating in a dance recital and that wasn't an everyday occurrence.
So this morning we're asking, is it ever okay to let children wear makeup?
Well, joining us now is journalist Julie Cook. So, Julie, it's a child wearing full rouge, bright red lipstick, hair tied back, looking very, very stylised, very much, I think, like a young adult. Is this really the sort of thing we should be doing with small children?
Oh, I think it's absolutely fine. I mean, first of all, in Khloe Kardashian's case, it was a dance recital, so it was very much a kind of performance element to it. She said herself in her post, it wasn't something they do every day. She was taking part in a dance activity. So, you know, I think she's vindicated on that front. But I've let my daughter play with makeup since she was 3. When she was 3, she showed a distinct interest in my makeup palettes, going through my stuff. She's 10 now, and while I don't let her wear a full face like a drag queen, I do let her wear, you know, a bit of mascara on a weekend if she wants to. I don't see any harm in it.
Clearly, if you're a child of a Kardashian who's paid millions of dollars to endorse cosmetics, you know, that's part of the fabric of their family. My concern, though, Julie, is putting those pictures on social media where people can see them. We live in an age now where, you know, wrong-uns are scouring the internet all the time.
A lot of girls do enjoy putting makeup on. It's almost like a self-expression thing. It's like painting on a canvas. They're just trying to be a bit artistic. I don't think it's necessarily as sort of sinister as we're making out. And I think as long as you're not posting pictures everywhere or putting them at risk of harm, I don't see any danger.
The People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. Our first topic tonight is the first report released by the COVID inquiry, which has been, well, extremely critical of the plans which were in place to deal with a potential pandemic outbreak. The report stated that flaws in the preparations meant that the pandemic caused more deaths and economic damage than were necessary, and that the UK government and devolved nations failed their citizens. First Minister John Swinney said the Scottish Government would consider in great detail the findings and learn lessons from them. I believe Scotland is better prepared for any future scenario, but we must be constantly learning the lessons, he said. The First Minister added, I believe Scotland is better prepared for any future scenario, but we must be constantly learning the lessons of the experience we had during our pandemic preparedness to see if it's as effective as it can be to deal with any threat that's faced by the public. I'm joined now to discuss all of this by Bella Hastie, co-author of The Accountability Deficit and director of Us for Them. Good evening, Bella.
Hi, Neil.
Thanks for joining us in these slightly unusual circumstances. You know, you've heard me talk about this subject ad nauseum in various contexts. Is this a whitewash? Is this an attempt just to absolve the key players of any real responsibility?
I think it's slightly more complex than that. And it's hard to necessarily tell us whether it's a whitewash or not yet, because it is only the first report of probably 9 or 10 more. And it may well end up being that way. It's been very clearly put forward in the media that the story is that people died due to government incompetence and they prepared for the wrong pandemic. When you look at the detail of Baroness Hallett's work, there are lots of things that you and I could have said early on. We could have said that actually it's an incredibly complex process that the UK had, and it focused on committees rather than outcomes, and there was no transparency or ownership. We would have said that it did appear to lack any flexibility. And more importantly, it didn't actually look at what they had proposed in the past and that what they proposed on the basis of the original pandemic. So there's some really important information in there, which says basically they decided that they had the wrong pandemic and therefore they were just making it up on the hoof and they were working it through. And this meant that they didn't look at any of the interconnected risks or the balance of harms or any of the knock-ons. And this is something that people like us have been saying for the last 4 years. And we were saying it at the time, weren't we? That they weren't looking at the balance of harms. They weren't looking at any of the implications. And it's reassuring that Baroness Hallett has actually said that. However, this document doesn't point fingers at individuals per se. It points fingers at the system. There'll be more, I think, individuals within the next modules as we go through.
Do you get the sense, I'll be frank, I get the sense that what's being set up here is a situation in which if and when something similar happens again, is launched upon us again, that they will feel justified. They will feel justified in the same people taking control without ever having had to pause to take account of the damage that was done the last time.
Yeah, I think that's a huge worry. I think that's a huge worry, Neil. I think there are some elements within the module report which actually could give us a little bit of hope, but you could also interpret it in another way. So, for example, Baroness Hallett talks about how legal coercion was not a policy, but she doesn't necessarily make it clear that it shouldn't be a policy and shouldn't be something that had been looked at, nor at any point have they appeared to look at the laws that they chose to lock us down. That may come in module 2, but in the hearings, no one asked about it. The other really big thing is that she talks and says lockdown was something that no one had ever considered before. Therefore, there was no plan and no one understood the impact. And lockdown should only be used as a last resort. You could interpret that as a positive, that she's at least assuming that lockdown is a last resort, or you could take it as, well, they're preparing for us for the fact that lockdown is an option. We just have to understand the impact and understand why that happens. It's hard to tell at the moment.
Andrew Eborn, what's your reaction? Admittedly, this is the first of what are expected to be several, statements coming out. But what do you make of the tenor of what we've had so far?
Well, the language is incredibly strong, isn't it?
Sorry, Bella. I was just meaning that
we're travelling. It might be a bit over. Yeah, too many Andrews, but it's a slightly different one. I know it's the joy of working remotely. The language, I think, is very interesting, isn't it? Because it's very strong. She talks about serious errors of state and fatal strategic flaws. And I always say history repeats itself because we don't learn the lessons from history. And in the report, they talk about actually they were ill prepared, and what they did was wrong. They basically were doing it as though it might be a flu epidemic or something along those sort of basis. But it is the first report, and what I find shocking actually is that we've just had the election, and not once did COVID come up in the questions on either part, any of the parties, as to how they behaved and the responses that they did. There will be many more questions which still have to be answered, and I think things about the inoculations and so on and so forth, that's going to be coming further down the line. So serious questions to be answered, but so far the report is fairly condemning.
Bella, it was shocking to me, really, that Serene Vallance, Chief Scientific Officer during the so-called pandemic, has now been made Minister of Science or similar by the incoming Labour government, which, if that isn't rubbing people's noses in the intention to carry on much as though nothing had happened, could they have done anything more to annoy the wounded public?
I totally agree with you, and I think this is one of the problems with these kind of sliding door, rotating windows that we have of people moving through the scientific world and moving from pharmaceutical to government to NHS and all the way through. And we don't actually have any way of linking this through. One thing that Baroness Hallett does talk about is a lack of transparency through this, and I think we'd all agree on that. And she actually talks about the fact that there was a lack of parliamentary scrutiny, which throughout the pandemic. We'd absolutely agree on that. And when we were looking at the accountability deficit, one of the things that really stood out to us was when we looked at the care home mandates, which was a shocking thing that happened in 18 months in to the pandemic. But at that point, there was not even an impact assessment. So legally, you couldn't pass that law without an impact assessment. This was raised by the House of Lords on a number of occasions, and it was raised by parliamentarians who actually described themselves as feeling like they were living in the Scream, and yet it was still bulldozed through.
Coming up, we'll be debating whether the UK should be adopting much stronger measures in order to try and achieve net zero, whatever that means, or whether it is a futile enterprise. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We'll see a mixed bag of weather across the UK during the week ahead, all of us seeing some rain at times, but when the sun pops through, it should feel pleasantly warm. We've seen a ridge of high pressure giving a lot of fine weather through the day on Sunday, but low pressure starting to move back in from the west. That's starting to feed outbreaks of rain in across Northern Ireland, and that will continue to push in across Northern Ireland as we head into the overnight period, reaching parts of southern Scotland and northern England during the early hours, with some showery bursts also working in across parts of Wales and the southwest of England. The southeast should hold on to some clear spells, and we'll also see some clear weather towards the north of the UK. And here we'll see quite chilly temperatures too. We could well see temperatures dip into low single figures in one or two spots, but elsewhere it stays pretty mild with temperatures in the low to mid-teens. So the new working week gets off to a sunny start, albeit quite chilly across the north of Scotland. Temperatures soon starting to decline though in that July sunshine. Whereas towards the south of Scotland, across Northern Ireland and parts of northern England, a cloudy picture. Some outbreaks of rain at times, still quite heavy in nature, that rain at times too. Some showery bursts still across parts of Wales and the west of England, starting to push into central southern England and the Midlands, whereas the southeast of England should start the day on a quite sunny note. As we go through the day, outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland, northern England and southern Scotland give way to brightening skies, but with scattered heavy showers in the afternoon, one or two of those turning quite thundery. The rain across southern parts of the UK will start to clear away towards the east, with plenty of sunshine across Wales, central southern England into the afternoon, and some sunshine too towards the far north and northwest of the UK. Temperatures peaking at 24 or 25 Celsius towards the southeast, so pretty warm even though it is July. As for Tuesday, we'll see further showery rain moving in from the west across England and Wales, a scattering of showers towards the north and northwest, at least to start with, because a ridge of high pressure will move in from the west and the weather will start to quieten down as we go through the day. That holds an improvement during the middle part of the week, all of us seeing some sunshine at times, temperatures responding to that sunshine too, but further rain arrives later.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show, hosted at least in part from my house. A government watchdog, the Committee on Climate Change, says the new Labour administration needs to hugely increase the generation of renewable energy if the UK is not to breach the Paris Agreement. The previous government has committed to a reduction of 68% in annual carbon emissions by 2030, compared with 1990 levels. Is such a target remotely achievable, and is it even desirable for us to take measures which could potentially have a negative economic impact? I'm joined now by Greg Gormley from Scoot Eco, which offers carbon footprint solutions for businesses. Hello, Greg, are you there?
Hello, I am indeed. How are you?
I'm fine. Greg, I don't know how aware you've been of the stance that I've taken on all of this over the months and years, but if not, I am of the opinion that the climate crisis, so-called, is a scam. And therefore, even before we get to, debating the pros and cons of the efforts to get to net zero, persuade me if you can, that any of this is any more than maximising profit for the usual suspects.
Right. Well, certainly, you have the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. It's basically the top 195 scientists from around the globe. And with their sixth assessment, they have established and said that human beings are warming up the planet. And that is the main premise from where climate change starts. Now, there is the argument about speed. There's the debate about the naysayers saying, it's going to happen in the next decade. It's not going to happen in hundreds of years. But ultimately, the bottom line crux is human beings are warming up the planet. And that is the starting point where I'd go from.
You accept that? Would you say that is no longer a matter for debate?
I would say it's no matter for debate anymore, because you can look over the past 25, 50 years and you can actually see the temperatures going up on an increased basis. And I know there's lots of debate about the Earth has been different temperatures over the years, but the reality is human beings weren't on the planet when woolly mammoths were there, etc. So we have to be careful about what we're doing with the planet. And if you look at what we're doing today, just in terms of A, how we live, B, how we have everything pre-packed and just have everything so ready for us, that we are actually causing this damage to the planet that is actually doing this warming up.
A friend of mine, Nick Hudson, has what he calls a heuristic, really, that he calls Hudson's razor. And he says that when anything is described as a global crisis, and when it's insisted that there are only top-down, one-size-fits-all global solutions, and a third part's very important, when any dissent from that opinion, any dissent is being stamped upon with ever-increasing ferocity, he says that is the sign of a scam, that you always have to prick up your ears when those three things come together. And that move, that insistence on a collectivist approach that brooks no dissent, is really at the heart of why I think we really have to think before we sign what I regard, being Agenda 2030, as a suicide note for half the population of the planet.
Yeah. I mean, one point I utterly agree with is that there is not one answer. You know, people are saying we have to do this. That is not the case. It is a combination of things we have to do. And it's about balance. Life is a massive balancing act. And the reality is, you know, if we just stopped producing oil tomorrow, the world would stop. So that's not actually possible. What we have to do is try and plan. And actually, we should try and utilize, like renewables being the next industrial revolution, to make cost of living cheaper for us, but actually fit it into being more sustainable as well. On the 4th of Jan 2023, 88% of our power produced in the UK was from renewable source, which is amazing. So it shows it is possible to get to this 100% and actually grow with it. So from my point of view, I think it's about balance. You know, we can't just rush things. And I understand your sentiment saying that, you know, there are people out there that are looking to profiteer from it. I'm very much about saying, look, we need to look at this and work together. And it's important to have debate as well.
Andrew Eborn, what say you? I think it's in the marrow of my bones that I'm suspicious about collectivist global solutions that will entertain no debate and talk about consensus and the science. What's your reaction?
I think you're absolutely right. Whenever you shut down debate, then absolutely our hackles should rise, because the reality, we must question everything. We become so reliant on so-called experts, and time again experts have been proved wrong. What I found fascinating in the recent election was actually reforms policy was saying, look, we can get rid of all our troubles about the NHS and underfunding here and so on and so forth if we simply abandon the net zero pledge, which was an interesting take on it. And he was accused, Richard Tice at that stage was accused of weaponising the climate crisis. But we have to be able to question it, and we have to make sure that we listen to all sides in the debate, because if you shut down debate, then basically you're going to shut down getting the truth.
Greg, you talk about renewables, you know, and for most people, myself included, we're talking there about wind turbines and solar panels. Now, seriously, Greg, those are not sources of energy that can be relied upon round the clock, and most specifically, they cannot be relied upon. The sun doesn't shine when we need it, and the wind doesn't blow when we need it. You know, in what sense is anyone even being realistic about talking about alternatives?
Absolutely agree. And this is where actually now there's been some planning law changes for battery storage, which is something that we need to do. We lose approximately 10 to 20% every day of our renewable power. Now, if we spent money on actually battery storage for that renewable power, so we actually had it at the source, for the national grid to draw on, that would actually help the national grid massively, and we could actually start building upon that. And now you can actually get planning permission on Greenbelt for critical infrastructure for these battery solutions. And it's something that more and more people are going to start investing in. And I think combined with the new Labour government, I think it could be something that works really well.
Greg Gormley, thank you very much for your brave contribution in the face of my cynicism. But I have to reiterate that, as far as I'm concerned, the so-called climate crisis is the biggest hoax yet foisted upon the human species on this planet. But thank you very much for your insights, Greg.
Thank you.
Next on the show, I'll be discussing a momentous week, truly momentous week in American politics, as President Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt before giving us the name of his running mate for his presidential bid. I'll see you soon.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Now, we've got a story and a half to tell you and bring you now. Our very own GB News political correspondent, who we love very much, Catherine Foster, joins us in the studio, and she's smiling, but she wasn't smiling for the past few days.
2 of her sons, Matthew and Andrew, were reported missing in Bali.
I got a text from a friend saying, can you give us a call, a bit worried about them. Then spoke to a girl they'd befriended who was in Sweden, but they'd met on their travels. And she told me that they'd gone up the mountain. By the time I found out, they'd been missing for 30 hours. They'd gone up the mountain on the Tuesday night, British time. This was the Thursday morning, without a guide. And they'd told her it was really hard. And she told them to turn back, but they hadn't. And they'd sent screenshots from this app with this trail that they were following on the app, screenshots of the app in case there was a problem, and a Snapchat of a Matthew avatar at the top. And she said, I know they made it to the top because I could see that his phone had nearly died. But the trail had actually closed many years ago. So the app, we will need to make sure that that gets taken off the app. But, you know, technology saved them in the end because it was the screenshots and it was the messages that they'd sent, but they should never have been without a guide.
But what were you doing during those 30 hours that Mum couldn't, when the phone died and Mum couldn't get in touch? Where were you? What were you up to?
Well, we were trying to figure out the best course of action, because it started to pour with rain. The amount of rain created a river, like a stream.
Yeah.
We were like, oh,
yeah,
let's follow the stream downhill, and then the sun set, and we just had to like sleep in the bushes in the jungle.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. To put it mildly, it's been an eventful week in US politics, with an assassination attempt on President Trump and a new Republican vice presidential candidate being named, and President Biden apparently coming down with COVID. Here to discuss all of that and more, I'm joined now by Jimmy Dore, comedian and political commentator. Hello, Jimmy.
Hello, great to be with you again.
Oh, thanks, Jimmy. Always good to hear your voice. I listened to our mutual friend Tucker Carlson, cogitating in the aftermath of what happened, and he said that it seemed to him that something had changed that day, the shooting transformed Trump in some sort of way, that he is now visibly a leader and a brave man. What was your gut reaction?
It was uncommonly brave. I couldn't think of a politician doing that. You'd think that once there's an active shooter and you've already been shot in a part of your head, that you would just stay down, and he didn't. And what was even so, that was really fascinating. And once you saw him raise his fist and say "fight, fight, fight," you couldn't help but feel the emotion of the moment. And then his crowd. The thing that I think is even more remarkable than that was that normally when there's a shooting, people just scatter and they trip over each other and they trample each other. And they didn't do that. They sat there calmly and they kind of followed Trump's lead. And I think that was an incredible moment of leadership, right? Because maybe if he didn't do that, maybe if he didn't get up and show his resilience and put his fist in the air and say fight, maybe they would have got scared and scrambled. But there was someone behind him, a couple people behind him who got shot, and a fireman actually got shot and died. So, and people did not scramble around and trample over each other, which is what always happens in those situations. So, yeah, it was remarkable. How it's changed him, I don't know. I did hear that leaked phone call where he was on the phone with Bobby Kennedy, and I've never heard a politician sound more magnanimous. And even to Joe Biden, the guy who's been prosecuting him, using lawfare, weaponizing the justice system against his political opponent, Donald Trump, he was even magnanimous to him and said nice things about him on the call. So, I'm not close enough to him, like Tucker, to know that it's changed him, but it certainly was quite. It was a moment of leadership, and it was stunning. Actually, I didn't think Trump had that in him.
Yeah, you mentioned the clip that went out of Bobby Kennedy Jr. Receiving a phone call in the aftermath, and I was struck by the way in which Donald Trump, and it was him talking, not Kennedy. He absolutely does not sound on that call like you might say the caricature Trump that's always pushed by the legacy media. He wasn't. And when he spoke at the convention, he didn't take the opportunity to be divisive or to stoke anything at all. He really does come across in those unguarded moments. And if there was a definition of an unguarded moment, it was that bullet, whizzing past his ear. He comes across as quite different than the way his opponents generally seek to portray him.
Well, yeah, they have to portray him as a madman. They have to portray him as this racist, madman, white supremacist, all these things, because Donald Trump, my theory is this, that Donald Trump is a deal maker. He really is a successful businessman, and they used to all praise him before he ran for president. They used to all want to be they were all golf buddies, right? That he was on every late night talk show in America. They gave him his own television show for over 10 years. They gave him, he's got his own star on the Walk of Fame on Hollywood Boulevard. I mean, the establishment loved that guy. So the fact that he didn't come up through the traditional political machine, so they didn't have control of him. And it's not that he was that wildly different or he was going to govern that wildly different, but they didn't have complete control of him. So they had to try to demonize him. And then when the demonization didn't work, they tried to Russiagate him and they tried to say he was a traitor to our country. And there's lots of theories about this, that he puts an ugly, because he speaks in such a brash way, that he puts an ugly face on imperialism, and it's harder to invade, smaller countries and steal their natural resources with a guy like Donald Trump than it is with a guy like Barack Obama or Joe Biden. And so he puts a bad face on imperialism, especially now that they've been painting him as a madman and a white supremacist for all these years. They can't have that. And he's also bad for their wars. I think the real big deal is that Donald Trump, because he comes from business, he's always looking for a deal. And he prides himself on, well, his book was called The Art of the Deal. So he's going to find a deal. He even said that in his speech last night. He said, I will end that Ukraine war. It would have never happened if I was president, and I can end a war with one phone call. And so he prides himself on that, whereas it seems like everybody else in the political spectrum in America prides themselves on being a warmonger.
That's it then for our TV hour. Thanks to all my guests. Thanks to Andrew Eborn for bearing with me and handling this slightly different version of the show. Please, to all of you, stay tuned for the brilliant Free Speech Nation. But we have more content coming up online. As I say, Jimmy Dore is staying with me, moving on afterwards to discussing Russia with George Samueli and the rise of the right with Ralph Schulhammer, another familiar friend of the show. Don't miss any of it, and I'll see you next week.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in My Big Opinion, as Rachel Reeves admits that she fears strike chaos. Labour are already rolling over to the unions and will all pay the price. In My Take at 10, the Tories are in total denial about their election wipeout. She's not everyone's cup of tea, but Suella Braverman is the only one telling the truth about her own party. Plus, in a Mark Meets special, a legend of political journalism, The Sun's Trevor Kavanagh. We're live at 9.